Imagine there's a farmer checking in on his favorite cow. He's looking around his field, and he sees a piece of black and white newspaper caught up in some faraway bushes. It happens to have taken on a pretty damn convincing cow shape. If you were there, you'd probably agree it was a cow. So the farmer's like, sweet, my cow's still here. Now let's also say the cow actually is in the field, but hidden behind a hill where the farmer can't see it. If we ask the farmer, do you know if your cow is in the field? He'll say yes. Is he right? Does he know it's there? Maybe we'll find out on today's show. Hey everyone, welcome to You've Got It All Wrong, a philosophy podcast for handsome people like you. I'm Paco Allen.
I'm Mark Sanders.
And I'm Chad Allen. Paco's story is a version of what's called the Gettier problem, named after the American philosopher Edmund Gettier, who first wrote about it in 1963. In the interest of using big words, we should note that this is a problem in the study of epistemology, the field of philosophy that deals with knowledge, which can be summed up as an attempt to answer the question, how do we know what we know? So anyway, up until Gettier, knowledge was widely defined as a justified true belief. We could be said to know X if we were justified in believing X, and if X was true. Just go back to the cow example for a minute. Let's look at the farmer's belief. We can say it's justified because the piece of paper, from his vantage point, looks a lot like a cow. If you or I were there, we'd say it was a cow too. So assuming we place some trust in our senses, we can say we are justified in believing the cow is there. And guess what? There actually is a cow in the field, so the farmer's belief is also true. So he has a justified true belief. Thus, according to the traditional definition of knowledge, he knows the cow is in the field. But the whole point of the Gettier problems, like this one, is that it just seems wrong to say that the farmer knows the cow is in the field. It's just a happy coincidence that his belief is both justified and true. And if that's the case, then you can have a justified true belief and not have it add up to knowledge. So now our traditional definition of knowledge, of what it means to know something, is in peril. And that's a big problem for epistemology, you guys. So what are we going to do? How do you want to respond to Gettier? Do we have to rethink our definition of knowledge? Should we just wait for this to all go away? Should we have another gin and tonic?
I mean, I think from a practical point, yeah, like we could just, like, everybody can turn the podcast off right now and ignore this, right? Because when everybody's walking around in their daily life. I mean, this is one of those topics that I think is, like, fully self-contained in the world of philosophy. You know, like some of the other things that we've talked about. Definitely people feel like, you know, when you start to dissect them, that there's like a real world practical application on a daily basis, you know, to some of these topics. This one is like a weird one because it is a really interesting, really critical aspect of, you know, what it is to be human and what it is to know things, but it is also almost completely contained within the
pretty
academic,
esoteric,
like within the academic world of philosophy. And I think the other thing I would say to the listeners out there is that I would expect to get out of this podcast exactly what everybody got out of some of the original source material of this topic, which is some of Plato's writings, which is like you won't come out of this having a defined position. The original writings that Gettier refers to...
Oh, it's Gettier?
It's Gettier.
I'm going to keep saying Gettier.
I would like to put a vote in for Get Along.
The original dialogue from Plato that Gettier refers to, when he refers to justified true belief or JTB, at the end of that, there is no final conclusion like there are in many things in philosophy. But I think, again, unlike some of the other topics we covered where I think some of us, at least, you know, here in the podcast studio, walk away from it thinking like, all right, here's my opinion on this, and this is what I believe in terms of the potential viewpoints that you can have on a particular topic. This is one where I feel like you kind of walk away from it just going, I don't know.
Right. Well,
maybe you don't.
I don't. I have a pretty clear opinion on this.
Well, I mean, like Plato walked away from the topic and was just like, meh.
Yeah, but he wasn't that smart.
He wasn't. He's no Chad Allen.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is also a topic that I think I had to go over like a number of times to get like a super clear understanding in my head of the problem.
Yeah.
That I could repeat pretty easily to myself. How do you know what you know, and how can you be sure of the things that you think you know? Descartes comes into this, but I'm sure we'll probably cover off on that on a separate podcast. But
Chad, do you want to just give a brief overview of what you understand to be epistemology in the classical sense?
Not really, no.
It's the study of defining how you know, what is knowable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty broad topic.
Isn't the joke that anytime you click on a link on Wikipedia, if you click on enough related links, you'll get back to philosophy and eventually you get to epistemology?
Well, that sounds about right. Yeah.
That's like a Kevin Bacon. Like
You're always 2 degrees from epistemology.
6 degrees of epistemology.
Yeah, I think that should be that would be a great party game. 6 degrees of epistemology.
Well, there is a game, a wiki race, where everyone in the room with the computer has to, a random word is picked out, like dandelion or Hitler. Then it's like people have to get to that topic from the front page of Wikipedia without typing stuff in, just by following links.
Because otherwise I would just type epistemology and I'd be...
What are the front links on Wikipedia?
Well, they change every day. That's the thing. That's why it makes it so, but you have to think, well, okay, like there's a country singer, there's an iceberg. Okay, like what will get me to a topic that's related and linked to that target
And those
topic?
are the 2 topics you pick are dandelions and Hitler.
Remind me to never play this game with you.
Are those on like the 2 ends of some sort of weird spectrum in your brain? Like, things that are nice and things that are terrible.
I believe both of them have extensive Wikipedia pages.
Wow.
Yeah, so anyways, to get back on track, I think that what everybody who's been talking about this topic from Plato to Gettier to us, and I'd like to put us in the same, like, right now, just put us in the same category as those two people, is, like, what kind of rules can we set up to evaluate something that you think you know,
right,
as a piece of knowledge to say, like,
right,
is that really knowledge or not?
Right. And so honestly, like you can start to see how there's some sort of real world application here, or at least some like tangible desire to have a definition of knowledge, right? Because we want to be able to say like, hey, we know that.
I know Mark's a jerk. And here's why. It's
right,
a justified true belief.
Right.
Because in common language, we recycle a lot of words to mean very different things, but for the same reason.
Well, so in philosophy of science, for example, it's kind of important to have a definition of knowledge, right? Like, how do we know that Bernoulli's principle is true? Or how do we know that, pick your favorite axiom of physics, right? Like, how do we know it's true?
We have
my favorite axiom of physics. How do I choose?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. Let's not get that. Welcome to our physics
we
podcast.
Don't have the time.
Wasn't there an episode of The Simpsons where there's a rapper and he points a Glock at someone and he says, "It's axiomatic, biatch."
I don't know.
See the show notes if I find it.
Yeah, so...
it's called a proof, right? Like in that term, in scientific and mathematical literature, the idea of knowledge is defined as an agreed-upon objective proof.
Right.
As opposed to a truth, which could be not related to practical experiment. It could be related to an axiom that cannot be proven, in which case the truth has to be a belief in that sense, right?
Well, yeah.
Maybe I'm getting far down the rabbit hole already.
Yeah, I feel like at that point it's a belief and not a truth. And in the context of this discussion, belief is one component, one requirement of knowledge, true belief.
Right.
But then you also have justification and truth.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you go all the way, if we can try to back out of Mark's rabbit hole, which I would love to go down later, but it was getting pretty deep. The core issue here is that, it does seem like in order for us to know something, we have to have a justification for believing it. And in order for us to know something, that thing has to be true, right? And that's the intuition that the Gettier problems are trying to unwind.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, I think the one thing that at the front of this, I said that there were some things about this that are different than some of the other topics we talked about. But I think the one thing that is similar is it is the kind of dissection of something that we think we intuitively understand.
Right.
But when you start to unpack it and look at it harder, it's like there are things in your life that you think that you know and that you think you have knowledge of. But when you start to question someone or yourself about like, well, how do you know that and how do you have knowledge of that thing? Your ability to describe how it is that is knowledge, it just becomes really difficult to like clearly explain.
It's like heuristics. If you had a light switch in your garage, and every time you went into your dark garage, you flicked the light switch and the light went on, you did that once a day for 20 years, you'd have a pretty strong belief that you flicking that light switch turned on that light, but it could be totally independent. It could be your building's getting struck by lightning at exactly that point every single day for 20 years.
Right.
It's a heuristic. It's a bias. It's a,
like fucking Thor's your neighbor or something. Like.
Mark's going into his garage again.
I will fuck with you, mortal.
Well, we could talk about a couple of ways that people have tried to sort of salvage the definition of knowledge, right? Because what's happening here is that Gettier is trying to tell us, like, hey, like we no longer have a definition of what it means to know something, so we're in trouble.
Yeah.
Because now we have this word we use, knowledge, and we thought we had a definition for it, and now we don't. So what are we going to do?
Well,
and so part of this story is like philosophers trying to construct a definition of knowledge that copes with these Gettier style problems.
Right. And I think that we've like covered this already, but I think it is one of those things that's it's a weird topic, and I think it deserves repeating what that classic definition of knowledge was pre-Gettier. And, he kind of claims that it comes from Plato, although in the source material that he's referencing, like I said, at the end of that dialogue, everybody that's involved in it comes out of there not having an agreed upon understanding of what knowledge is. But Gettier still kind of like goes back to that as his definition of what knowledge is, which is knowledge is based on having a justified, true belief. So there's like three components of it, right?
Yeah, and I think we should talk about a few ways that people have tried to sort of reconstruct a definition of knowledge that avoids these Gettier problems, or that kind of avoids the critique that was put forward by Gettier. One of the first ones, one of the kind of like early attempts to overcome this problem was to say we need some additional conditions. So in addition to a belief being justified and true, it has to have some other third condition that will help us overcome these kind of Gettier objections. One of the early proposals was, well, let's say that a condition of knowledge is that the thing that caused your belief has to actually be the thing that would cause your belief to be true.
Right.
So like the only thing that can, so it's sort of like it only counts as knowledge if the cow itself caused you to believe that the cow is in the field, and not a piece of paper.
Right. So it's like, it's got to be a belief. It's got to be justified. That justification has to be caused by the actual thing that I am trying to possess knowledge of,
right.
And it has to be true.
Right. So,
which is kind of like the third and fourth versions of those things. Like the third and fourth criteria are like, get really gray.
Well, yeah. So this is kind of like, Alvin Moore is a philosopher who put forward one of these early.
Oh yeah, the writer of The Watchmen. Alvin Moore.
Alvin Moore, yeah, creator of The Watchmen and famous epistemologist.
I think the actual author of The Watchmen is quite a famous epistemologist in his own right.
So he said that, for example, that your belief had to be caused by a reliable process, so a process that flowed from the thing that you have a belief about. And so that in the example of the cow, like there's no reliable process that flows from the thing that you have a belief about, the cow. There's no reliable process that flows from that to you.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is why that doesn't work, is because I think that most people intuitively would say the process was reliable. Like you were looking at something with your eyeballs, like a sensory aspect, that you use, that most people use every day, like most of the day, to understand what the world is like around them. And intuitively, like if I look at something and you look at something and Mark looks at something and we all think we're looking at the same thing, we all think we're looking at a cow, like how is that not considered intuitively a reliable process? Like at that point, like fuck the word reliable. Like let's redefine that thing.
Well, yeah. I mean, where most people, where the primary critique of this response, of Alvin Moore's response and other ones like it, is that because now we have to unpack the meaning of reliable process, to your point, right? And where you're going to end up is a reliable process is the one that causes me to have a true belief, right? Because it's going to turn out that the only really reliable process for causing you to believe in the cow is like the existence of the cow. Like all other processes will be unreliable. And so now we have a circular definition.
And that description is, I believe, would it be correct in philosophical terms to refer to that as irreducible? You're reducing it down to the most core elements of the actual process that you would use.
And it seems like in some specific cases, depending on whether or not the actual thing that I was trying to possess knowledge of influenced my belief, in one case, my eyeballs might be right, and in another case, my eyeballs might be wrong. So the same process in two different cases are unreliable. Like I look at you, you're across the room, I see you drinking, I think I possess knowledge of you consuming water. In another case, I'm in a desert looking at a mirage, and I think that's water, and it's not. I'm using the same process in both of those situations to create my belief that something's true and possess knowledge of it.
Right.
But in one case, that process works just because it's true, and in another case, it doesn't because it happens to not be true.
And there's lots of processes, I think, in terms of people I'm sure would be familiar with the work of Arthur Conan Doyle. Like Sherlock Holmes had reliable processes, and the one that is like most often talked about in terms of how he would get to truths, beliefs.
Right? Well, I mean, based on the new movies, his process for discovering things is ramp speed camera work and punching.
Right. Yes. The punching hypothesis is well, just this is a tangent, but in the original novels, he was quite a boxer. Oh. He would go undercover, and he would often it was talked about he would jab with his left and not swing with his right, because that's how a gentleman fought. Marcus of Queensberry rules. So the process I'm talking about is the idea of deductive reasoning. In the example you gave of like your eyes looking at a certain thing, like deductive reasoning is, in the words of Conan Doyle, removing every other possible interpretation until you're left with whatever's left, and that is the truth, because you've exhausted all other possibilities. Which technically, what Holmes did in the novels wasn't deductive reasoning, because he would often make these inductive leaps, right. And he was like, "Oh, there's mud on his boots, and that the only place the mud is on the south bank of the Thames. Therefore, you must have gone to the south bank of the Thames." No, someone else could have been wearing the boots. They could have moved the mud. Like he's making all of these leaps around these
motherfucker
beliefs.
Knew his mud though. That's
red South Bank mud.
That is South Bank Thames mud.
So there's lots of processes, and some of them are more flawed than others.
Right.
Okay, so let's throw that one out.
Right. So that was option one for resolving the Gettier problems, Gettier problems.
Can't wait for number two.
So
is it in with a bullet?
No.
Number two, in with a bullet.
So there was this other thread, which is we need to alter what we mean by justified. So this may seem similar at first, but the notion is the definition of knowledge as a justified true belief is the right definition, but the Gettier problems show us that we just need a tighter definition of what it means for belief to be justified. So in the case of the paper, we would say, all right, well, you weren't justified because your senses misled you. And so we need a stronger definition of what it means for something to be justified. And if we layer that on top of the justified true belief definition of knowledge, then we'll get somewhere.
So does that mean like I should have been more diligent in my exploration of whether or not I had knowledge of the cow being in the field? Like I should have done more than just looked out in the field and saw something that I thought was the cow. I should have I should have maybe gotten my eyes, like I should go to the optometrist first, get my eyes checked. Is my vision good? Right? Because I'm making an assumption that my eyes work. Right? Like I think this point comes down to like the assumptions that you're making when you believe that you're justified in something. Yeah. So I assume that my eyes work, right?
Yeah.
I assume, and this is where it gets ridiculous, I assume that the cow didn't change color overnight.
Right.
Like, I assume that someone hasn't brought their cow into my field.
Right.
I assume that there isn't a painting of a cow out there. Like, all the other possibilities that could exist that could, like, wreck my justification of believing my cow is in the field by looking at it. I have to investigate all those before
Right,
I can,
which you're never
going to
do. And basically this is like a slippery slope to skepticism, because what you're going to say is, you know what, I can't trust my perception of the cow being in the field. Like, there could always be something undermining my senses. There could, my neighbor could have always put a fake cow in there. There could have been like a sweet hologram
fucking
of a
Thor
cow
with his lightning bolts to my light bulb when I flick on my lights, and his fake cows.
Well, he is a god, right?
This sounds more like Loki's work.
Yes.
Trust-
Oh man, Loki
trust
dressing up as
as
Thor.
That is so Loki.
Right. So Loki could always be
Yeah.
messing with you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the problem of trying to like shore up the definition of what counts as a justified belief in order to fix this problem is that you're just never going to get a good enough definition.
Yeah. I mean, at some point, like, and again, another episode, at some point you like slip back to Descartes and say, like, the only thing I can know
Right.
is that in some way, shape, or form I exist.
Right. And that's the ultimate, like,
Yeah.
skeptical with a capital S, like, position. And that's where I think you will end up if you try to counter the Gettier problem in this way. By saying that we need to have a better idea of what it means for something to be
Like,
justified.
even if you and I and Mark are also like, we looked at it, we thought it was there, we took the time to walk
Not
across
good
the
enough.
field. It's not a painting. It's not my neighbor's cow. It could be a fucking clone, or it could be a hologram or some shit. Like, your senses can always be unreliable.
Just like the blind man and the elephant.
Yeah.
They're all seeing different things, seeing quote unquote.
What's
The blind man and the elephant?
no? You can't just throw that in the podcast.
Yeah.
And like, what?
Well, it's this group of blind men, and they encounter something in the road, and like one of the blind men comes up and he grabs his trunk.
Is this
and
a true story?
Yeah, well, this is an aphorism, and the first blind man said, like, okay, like there's something in front of it. It's this long, round, muscular cylinder of the trunk. Another guy walks up and he touches the side. It's like, no, it's a large wall-like substance because it's touching the side. Then one touches the soft, flappy ear, and it's like, no, it's a large. So they're all perceiving only a portion of the reality that they're able to interact with based on the nature of their perceptions.
Right.
Elephants are weird. Is that kind of like the side plot of that story?
Elephants are big.
Yeah. Also, really had to hold myself back on the giant penis jokes there at the beginning of that.
Well, yeah, you would.
There were two different blind guys who basically said the same thing, but were touching different parts of it.
Okay. All right.
Welcome to
Okay.
our zoology podcast.
Elephant erotica section.
All right. So 2 down. The third one. What's the third option for dealing with?
good.
Third option with dealing with Gettier.
The third option is to basically say, fuck it. Like that this is a bankrupt enterprise. There are a few versions of this. One is to say we have to take the concept of knowledge as sort of like axiomatic, and we can't be attempting to like have knowledge about knowledge, essentially. That like we're trying to build a definition for a sort of fundamental first principle that's just never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, in Gödel Bach, Gödel's greatest discovery, or maybe one of them, is the fact that he did establish the fact that there are many true axiomatic beliefs and understandings in mathematics, in pure abstract mathematics, that all the underpinnings of our everything from pure integer cardinal numbers all the way up through very sophisticated maths refer to, but they cannot be proven. They are 100% true, but they also can never be proven.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel so bad punting on this because, as I said earlier, we're already putting ourselves in the same category as Plato and Socrates and Gettier, and those motherfuckers punted on this.
Right.
Like
There's a mathematician and an engineer who both like this girl in their class. The mathematician quotes the Zeno paradox.
Is this a true story?
No, this isn't a true story.
Did Sting write a song about this?
This is an
Oh,
aphorism.
that's a Nabokov book.
So the mathematician quoting Zeno's paradox, where as you approach a body, the distance between you and that destination is halved every time. And the mathematician is very lovelorn because it tells the engineer that it's unfortunate because I'll never arrive at her because the distance will always be.
This is their student?
No, this is two students, both who both liking this one girl in the class.
Okay.
And they both.
I thought you said professors, and I was like, this
No.
story's super creepy. Why has it got to be creepy?
Okay. Two students, and the mathematician is lovelorn because he lets the engineer, his buddy, know that he'll never get to her because the distance between him and her will always be halved and then go to an infinitely small amount of distance. And the engineer's response is, "I think I can get close enough for all practical purposes." That's the idea of the pragmatic approach to our use.
What's
of
he mean
knowledge.
by practical purposes, Mark?
Yeah. So right. So if you think about how the pragmatists would approach this problem, in particular, if you think about how William James, who was kind of the father of the pragmatic approach in philosophy in the 20th century, he probably would have said that a belief is true if holding that belief over the long run has fruitful consequences. So he probably would have said that your belief that the cow is in the field is true because over the long run that's a belief that would have proved fruitful for us because the cow was in fact in the field. So if we had, for example, made a deal to sell the cow to someone, our belief that the cow was in the field would have been fruitful because when we actually went to sell it, we would have found it and we would have been able to sell it. And so truth is sort of guided by providing of outcomes that are reliable and that we can expect to occur over time.
The other notable pragmatist of the 20th century, Bruce Lee,
Right.
Developed his own martial art based on a variety of techniques from across a number of disciplines, referred to as Jeet Kune Do, which loosely translated meant the way of whatever works.
Is that true?
Yeah, that's right. You got to headbutt the guy? Headbutt the guy.
What is it called?
Jeet Kune Do.
Jeet Kune Do?
I never saw Bruce Lee headbutt a guy.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it wasn't a truth.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. As much as I like to be a pragmatist in a lot of aspects of my life, that seems like a pretty squishy dodge to me.
Really?
Yeah.
So you don't think that we can just say that you? So I think you can't just. I think I would say, you know what? Good enough. The farmer knew that his cow was in the field.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I think this is a place where you and I tend to disagree a lot on these types of topics, which is I think it's really hard to live your life trying to say that I only have knowledge of things based on Gettier's definition of knowledge. It's a really impractical way to live your life, from a moment to moment basis. But I also think that the idea that guy knew that his cow was in the field is total bullshit. He didn't. He was fucking lucky. It was an accident. But this is where I think it's how we live our daily lives does not match up to the logical analysis of ideas knowledge.
Well, but if you the one reason why you'd want to try to get a handle on this is if you were to try to build a form of artificial intelligence that needed a sense of knowledge in of its own right, so it could learn and so it could communicate and make decisions based on what it knew to be true. So in that regard, it's a practical endeavor to look at the actual fundamentals of what knowledge is, so we can make use of that information elsewhere.
Right, but would you try and write a program that takes the pragmatic approach to it, where it's hey, if this calculation you're running
is how we do it now. If you train up a neural network, that's exactly what you do, right? You're looking for the pragmatic outcome of that network to be able to predict certain events or answer certain questions in a reliable way. And you don't need to write in your program for your neural network, you don't have to include a section at the beginning of it that has a definition of knowledge, right? It learns over time by finding the principles that generally lead to the outcomes that it's seeking
through heuristics.
Well, maybe the fucking Google driverless car has a better has more knowledge than we do.
More knowledge than you do, anyway.
like Peter Norvig, the guy at Google in charge of machine translation and artificial intelligence, talks about how none of the systems that they use to translate written and spoken language understand those languages in any way.
Right.
They don't have any knowledge of them. They're just looking for patterns. How much of these words and symbols and sounds match what we know as understood and formulated words and meaning and sound over here? And then it's just a question of probability.
Right.
All right. This is about all I can take on this.
Okay, yeah, let's shut this part
And
down.
I already folded us into the same category as Plato and Gettier, and I'm happy to punt on it, which is what Plato,
exactly what they did,
which
basically.
is what Plato and
what
Socrates
Plato did. Yeah.
Yeah. So and just
well, but I mean, Plato. Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, just to make sure that we don't think of it as purely a Western white philosophical discussion. There's plenty of ideas from ancient India and China around Buddhism and the practices of understanding that the world is also as unknowable for exactly the same reasons outside of the Greco-Roman tradition of philosophy as well. So it's not the fact that those are the only individuals who came to those conclusions. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, fair enough.
But
All men, of course.
Plato punted.
All right, well, let's punt.
And according to Plato, so did Socrates.
So we're following in a long line of a long tradition of really smart people punting on this question.
Yeah,
I'm all for it.
maybe Socrates didn't, but the only person to write it down was Plato.
Yeah. So, I mean, where this whole thing started was from Plato's dialogue, Theaetetus, which is named after one of the characters in the dialogue, which is a real person. I mean, this is like his dialogues were super, super Inception-like, where there would be people talking about conversations about other people, and there would be conversations within conversations. But supposedly, Socrates, that whole dialogue ends with Socrates saying, "We are better off knowing what something is not, as this will help us determine at a later time what it is," which is basically like, oh.
I love it. So I got to go now. I need to check on my cow.
Yeah.
Is that cool?
All right, well, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Hey, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. We just wanted to take a minute, thank everyone for listening, and ask for a few minutes of your time to help us out. If you like the show and want to help us spread the good word, the best thing you can do is head over to iTunes and give us a review. And while you're there, you might as well subscribe to the show. I have a justified, true belief that ratings, reviews, and subscriptions are the primary factors that determine whether we get noticed and give us the best chance of making this thing successful. We really appreciate the support. All right, now back to the show.
As regular listeners know, we like to use the second half of the show to step back from the philosophical discussion and just talk about some of the things that got us interested in the topic. What do you got, Chad?
So I actually like this topic a lot because the backstory is pretty interesting. So as we said at the beginning of the show, Edmund Gettier wrote this paper in 1963 in which he posited his original set of Gettier problems. It's the only paper that Gettier ever wrote. It's 3 pages long, but it had...
I've heard 2.5.
2.5, yeah. It depends because...
Double spaced.
So he was a... with 2-inch margins. He was a professor at Wayne State University.
Our papa's
yeah,
alma mater.
Our papa went to school there. So his first job,
1968. Was Dad at fucking school with
Edmund Gettier? I don't know. So he's a professor emeritus at University of Massachusetts at Amherst now, and that's where he spent most of his career. But I don't know when he moved from Wayne State to UMass.
Was it stately Wayne State? Is that what they refer to it as? Or am I thinking of Stately Wayne Manor?
You're thinking of Stately Wayne Manor, which is where Batman went to school.
Did Edmund Gettier and Batman go to school together?
That's why he only wrote one paper. He's busy defending
Gotham. What I'm
Gotham.
fucking saying is that our dad might have smoked weed with Edmund Gettier at Wayne State.
Oh my God! All right. We're gonna have to. This will be in the show notes. We'll either confirm or deny that our dad smoked weed with Edmund Gettier.
I could imagine him getting really angry at him. So like, Gettier, what's your problem? Man, that gives me a great idea for a paper.
Basically Gettier's buddies at Wayne State, which was his first job.
Which might have been our dad.
No, like,
No,
well,
okay.
Alvin Plantinga and like other, he actually was a professor at Wayne State when some other young, well-known philosophers were also young professors there. And he, after his first couple of years there, he hadn't published anything. And so his buddies were like, Ed, you got to publish something or you're going to get fired. Basically, they were like, you got to write something or you're out of here. And he was like, like he had this one idea. And so he wrote this paper. He was
like, I don't know shit. What do I know? I don't know anything. I don't even know how I would go about proving that I know anything.
And so the story that Plantinga tells, which is, potentially apocryphal, is that Gettier had the paper published in Spanish in a journal in South America because he wanted to be able to.
It was like in fucking cat fancy, gato fancy. Like
because he wanted to be able to put it on his CV for the review committee. So
what's a CV?
It's curriculum vitae, resume.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
It's like a resume for academics, because he needed to demonstrate to the faculty at Wayne State that he had published something, but he didn't want anyone to read it because he thought it was really terrible.
2.5 page double-spaced 2-inch margin garbage.
But as the story has it, after a couple of his friends read it, they were like, "Oh no, this is actually really good."
Did they read Spanish? These
friends? He let them read the English version, and so it was published. I think it was published in Analysis. Was the American journal that was published in, and it became this huge touchstone in 20th century epistemology. It's one of the top 10 most cited philosophy articles of the 20th century. So like bang for buck, number of citations to number of pages. This is probably, by some arguments, like the most important philosophical paper of the 20th century.
But dude also like wrote that the rest of his career, right?
Yeah, he did. So yes, that was the only paper that he ever published. I mean, he was a tenured professor at UMass, so
he didn't have to write anything at that point.
He didn't. This paper was so earth-shattering in a really like nerdy philosophical way. It generated so much conversation and so much discussion that he was basically able to like sort of ride that wave for the rest of his career. I don't think you could find another academic philosopher who was so well known and so oft cited for having written so little. I mean, he wrote one paper.
It's like if the Wachowskis never made a movie after The Matrix.
Oh, that would have been such a good thing.
I mean, you could imagine Gettier, based on the epilogue to him writing this paper and what he's done since, you can imagine if he wrote more papers, they would have been the Matrix 2 and the Matrix 3 of philosophy.
Right. So he did the right thing. Yeah.
No,
and you think that maybe someone in South America in Spanish was reading the second one and like, yeah, I don't think so. Even in Spanish, this isn't working for me.
But so, I mean, the other weird thing, though, too, is that, like one of the foundations of that 2.5 page double-spaced 2-inch margin paper is that, oh, hey, well, like, Plato says that this is knowledge.
Right.
And he goes back to the justified true belief foundation.
Right.
But there's 3 arguments in Plato's dialogue, which is a story of 2 ancient Greek dudes talking about about a conversation that they overheard years ago of 3 other ancient Greek dudes. It's like a weird nested inception story.
Right.
Which I guess all of Plato's dialogues were, hey, let me tell you this story about these 2 guys talking. and these two guys talking, one of them overheard this other story that he's going to recount to these other guys about these other three guys talking.
Because the practice, like, he didn't write it down as a means to kind of like transmit knowledge. He wrote it down as a way to express the idea that dialogue is the way that you have these learnings. You engage in a practice of discussing, and writing was just a side effect.
Well, and supposedly there's also like a bunch of other like nested meanings in there, which people have been trying to interpret for centuries about. Supposedly there's commentary on the idea of juries and people's recollections of things and how accurate those are. Like, there's supposed to be a bunch of this like deeper cultural subtext in a lot of that. But the Theaetetus, which is named after one of the main characters in this story, who's the story within a story character, they go through three different basically arguments for what knowledge is. And one of them is kind of justified true belief. Right. And like that gets like scrapped along with the other two arguments. So it's weird that Gettier comes along and he's like, hey, this is the understood millennia old understanding of what knowledge is. Right. It's justified true belief. And he cites Plato, who's Plato's citing Socrates. And even going back that far, that was not there. Like, there was no agreement whatsoever about justified true belief being the foundation of knowledge. In fact, it's kind of in there to say this is the closest you can get, and even that's unreliable.
Right. So there's like this weird idea that Gettier sort of like pulled a fast one on everyone and sort of set it up that justified true belief was the definition of knowledge, and then like poked a big hole in that.
It depends what the definition of is.
That's your impersonation of Bill Clinton.
I think it's the best.
All right, I want all of our British listeners to write in and let us know if that sounded like Bill Clinton, and I want our American writers to write in.
You knew who I was talking about. So
not because of the impersonation. I just want to be clear right now. It's not because of the quality of the impersonation.
Just because everyone knows who said that.
Oh, man.
But there's actually another, I think, American political reference, which is tangentially relevant here, which is Donald Rumsfeld's famous quip about
unknown knowns and unknown unknowns.
Well,
there's certain known unknowns, and then there are unknown unknowns, and it's like,
well, that's accurate, though, right?
There was no yellow cake, and aluminum tubes are used for all kinds of shit.
Welcome to our philosophy podcast and our political podcast.
Yeah, if you're a fucking Donald Rumsfeld fan, unsubscribe right now.
Okay, and so there's this famous press conference, right, where Donald Rumsfeld is talking about knowledge, and he runs through sort of like the four categories of knowledge.
Well, he ends up talking about knowledge. What he's trying to do is fucking dodge questions.
Right. Well, yeah.
But it ends up in this really weird, like, philosophical area.
I mean, he's trying to dodge the question of, did you know
there were WMDs? And he's like, oh, no? Knowledge?
Right.
So he says knowledge is a funny thing.
Back it all up, everybody.
So he says, look, there are the known knowns, right? The things that you know. There are the known unknowns, which are things that you don't know, right? Yep. There are the unknown unknowns, which are just like gaps in your field of knowledge, right? You don't know what you don't know.
You don't know them, but you also don't know that you don't know them.
Right. And then, those are sort of three things that everybody kind of talks about. And then Donald Rumsfeld tries to layer in this fourth thing, the unknown knowns. And in his original memo to himself, he says that the unknown knowns.
P.S. Who the fuck writes memos to them? This is what you're describing is a diary. Donald Rumsfeld had a diary.
I like to
memo to yourself. You can't write a memo to yourself. I think by the definition of what a memo is. Donald Rumsfeld had an audio diary.
I misspoke.
Yeah,
he meant these memos to many of them to be for consumption by his staff and other members of the administration.
His staff of philosophers? Who the fuck is he writing
this? Let's tune into Donald Rumsfeld Radio this afternoon.
Oh my God, we should definitely have him on the podcast.
My afternoon tea. I'm going to sip my afternoon tea and listen to a little WRMFLD.
So what was the unknown knowns?
So in his original memo, he said that the unknown knowns were things that you think you know, that it turns out you did not know. So I think I know X, but it turns out that I didn't know X.
Oh, this
right?
is pretty, yeah, like WMD.
Right.
I thought I knew WMD were
Right.
in Iraq.
Yep.
Turns out I didn't.
I thought I knew my cow was in the field.
Yep.
Turns out I didn't. Okay, so then
Cow of mass
so
destruction.
this comes up again in his interview with Errol Morris in the film Unknown Knowns, and Errol Morris asks him about it, and he actually redefines it on the spot. And Rumsfeld says, "The unknown knowns are things that you may possibly know that you don't know you know." And so in the first formulation of it, where he says things that you think you know that it turns out that you did not, you actually have less knowledge rather than more. You thought you knew something, but it turns out that you didn't.
And a lot of people would be like, yeah, okay, I've done that.
Right. And then, but when he's talking about it in the film, he says, no, the unknown knowns are the things that you know. You actually do know, but you just didn't know that you knew them. And so in that formulation, you actually have more knowledge than less.
But it's
right?
like some weird fucking like Zen subconscious thing where it's like somehow your brain knows that, but you're not consciously aware that you know it.
I actually think that this formulation is the Gettier problem. So things that you possibly may know that you don't know you know is the cow in the field.
But
right?
Rumsfeld,
you know that the cow is in the field.
Right. But Rumsfeld's unknown knowns are themselves an unknown known, where he didn't even fucking realize he was saying that shit. He didn't even realize that what he was describing was a Gettier problem. He was dodging. He was tap dancing when somebody was pressing him on that question.
Right.
He's like, yeah, it's shit that fucking don't know, but then you...
Well, just imagine that. Replace cow with WMD.
Done.
And that's essentially the Donald Rumsfeldian formulation of the Gettier problem.
I disagree wholeheartedly. I mean, this is going to take a real hard bend towards politics, but that's like what was going on there was not, man, I've looked out there, I've used my fucking satellites and all my tech, and I've seen those WMD, and I know they're there. And it turned out that your satellite was wrong, that you weren't looking at the WMD. What you were looking at was a fucking giant 30-acre computer printout of a WMD. But good news, in the end, there was WMD there. What turned out was you didn't have satellite images. You didn't have shit. You had some terrible fucking computer renderings of a truck that had a WMD on the back that you sent Colin Powell to the UN with.
Right.
There, you didn't see WMDs, and then in the end, also there weren't WMDs.
Well, that's his original formulation of the unknown knowns, which are things that you think you know, that it turns out that you did not.
Did not think he knew that.
You don't think Rumsfeld thought that he...
No. All those guys knew that they didn't know that. They had nothing. They had a phone conversation with a dude who was like, hey, Steve, some guys are going to be coming by to inspect your shit later. Yeah? From where? Yeah, from the government. Okay. Yeah, so clean up that stuff outside. The stuff outside? Yeah, that big garbage pile, clean it up. Okay. And then Colin Powell had to go in front of the UN and try and convince them that garbage pile those two guys were talking about was WMDs. That's what they had.
What would Gettier say?
Gettier would say, fuck you for making us go to war over bullshit WMDs.
Are we going to have to recut this entire episode so that I say Gettier instead of Gettier?
No, mix it up.
No, I'm going to, hold on, everybody be quiet for a second. Gettier. No, I'm just going to edit that in over top. No, I got a clean cut of it. I'm going to edit that in over top of every time we say Gettier.
Gettier.
No, it's going to be my voice.
Oh,
Cut into yours. Just
so weird.
Just to put an exclamation point on the fact that you said it wrong the whole time.
Right. Well, okay, so I'm sorry I took us down that Rumsfeld rabbit hole. I thought it was tangentially related.
No, it is. It's interesting and heavily related.
And another example of knowing something when not knowing you know it. Stephen Johnson, in his book "Where Do Ideas Come From," had an anecdote where he looked at the work of Charles Darwin, who in his public presentation of the theory of evolution, was able to pinpoint exactly a date based on the publishing of The Origin of Species. But if you go back for like 10 years before that, he wrote out all of the main tenets of natural selection and survival of the fittest and all of those key points without ever having the theory. He had all the information. There was no, this is the subject of Stephen Johnson's book, there is no like lightning bolt sense of knowledge that you didn't know something before and now you do know something. But this, again, more from a neurological and kind of cultural point of view.
Unless Thor's your neighbor.
Unless Thor's your neighbor. Then it's all lightning bolts. But he knew what the answer was without knowing he knew it.
So he knew about evolution, but he didn't know that he knew it.
Yeah, he didn't know he had a theory
Right.
that explained this particular question, but he knew the answer that the theory gave him.
It's weird. I mean, personally, I feel like I've had that experience where like I've gone to see somebody give a lecture about something and all of the individual ideas and aspects that they're talking about, I know those things, but then the way that they like bring them together and summarize them into like a coherent worldview seems new. And it's like, what is that? Where like the whole, like the first 3/4 of the lecture, I'm like, know it, agree, heard it before, but they bring it together in some kind of like coherent.
Isn't that just all knowledge? Isn't all knowledge like that? Like it's just.
But there's a new piece of knowledge that he didn't have.
But is that an
he does
unknown
have.
known? I guess that's what I'm saying though. Is like that seems like a description that at least I could listen to and
Rumsfeld, Darwin, and
Gödel,
Gettier walk
Escher.
into a bar.
I punch Rumsfeld. I buy Gettier a drink. Who else?
Darwin.
Darwin.
Shake his
Darwin.
hand.
Yeah, shake his hand.
Yeah, married his first cousin. A little weird.
And not back then.
Yeah.
But also, if you read the history of Darwin and his family, a lot of that marriage and the genetic problems that his children had, like, led to his theories on evolution and genetics.
Like he experimented on his family.
Well,
by marrying his cousin.
Not intentionally. Like, not like Pavlov.
Yeah, no,
like
yeah.
Pavlov's like, ew, we experiment on our
Right.
children like these dogs.
Right.
Not like Duchenne.
I think that Pavlov might have not.
Did
even
Pavlov?
known.
Was that Pavlov or Skinner or both?
I think both. I think
Yeah.
Pavlov might not have owned dogs.
Right, just kids.
Yep.
So also big year for Gettier in 1963, assassination of JFK.
Oh yeah.
First episode of Doctor Who. He had a lot on his plate. He had a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. Well, he
No,
was
between assassinating the president and watching Doctor Who.
yeah,
like then writing his 3-page paper.
that's a full calendar.
Oh man, gotta assassinate the president. Gotta watch this fucking crazy sci-fi thing. I don't have time for this. Double spacing, 3-inch margins.
Man, the SEO on these show notes are going to be awesome.
All right, everybody. I think that's it. Chad, anything else?
No, I'm good.
Mark,
let's
anything
wrap up.
else?
I'm awesome. In every sense of the word.
That wraps it up for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and give us a rating in iTunes. As always, you can find us online at you'vegotitallwrong.net, where you can find show notes for today's episode. You can also send us an email to feedback@you'vegotitallwrong.net with questions, comments, or recommendations for show topics. And you can also follow us on Twitter. I'm at Paco Allen.
I'm at Chad Allen.
And I'm an M. Sanders.